Um, Hello everybody, thank you for coming. It's great, there's such a good turnout. I'm slightly worried about who's looking after the galleries. So yeah, I'm going to talk you through the George Shaw show. I said it, see? Someone said George Shaw show. So just a bit of background. George Shaw is one of the kind of leading British painters of now. He's born in 1966, so he's 52, yeah, something like that. I think it's an important exhibition for us because I think it's the first time we've had a sort of just a simple, dedicated focus on a contemporary artist in the Roper programme. You know, we've shown artist collections and so on, but so it's an important departure. It's a very prestigious exhibition. It's coming from the Yale Centre for British Art, which, as you probably know, is the kind of primary institution in the United States focused on the history of British art. So it was his first, it was a major retrospective of his there. Our version is considerably condensed, but covers the whole of his career, has the major works and covers all the different sections of his career that show did. So it spans a period from his time at the Royal College of Art in the 1990s right through to a few months ago, or at least early last year. And I think it's an important show. I think both shows that we have opening this week are really important at this time. You know, why museums matter, the question is so fundamental to our sector at the moment. You know, when the role of the museums in society is being sort of rethought, at the same time the whole idea of sort of public funding of museums is being sort of questioned and challenged and some would say undermined through the sort of austerity programme. It's really, really urgent that we ask that question and answer it, why museums matter so much. So I think there's a huge kind of contemporary relevance to that. And similarly, as you'll see, the Shaw show has a similar contemporary relevance because what he deals with is all of his paintings are of the council estate in which he grew up in Coventry. And he's fascinated by the ideals that saw this place designed and built in the 1950s, those post-war reconstructive ideals of creating communities that would bring people together and give them a sort of, you know, a great standard of living and a great environment in which to live and in which to sort of commune together. And his paintings document how, in his view, that utopian ideology has been sort of reversed and undermined over the last, you know, the whole of his adult life. There's obviously a subject for debate there, but you know that, as you'll see in the work in the exhibition, that journey of sort of 30 years of decline of those ideals and of the estate culminates really in the kind of populist nationalism that for some at least, has informed the whole kind of debate around Brexit. So I think it's a really interesting exhibition to have in this season, rather than any other. So that's a bit about that. I can't remember how the slide's here. The subtitle is A Corner of a Foreign Field, and that's a reference to Rupert Brooke's poem Soldier. If I should die, think only this of me, that there's some corner of a foreign field that is forever England. So, you know, kind of that title is bringing to the surface that sense that what George is doing through these sort of contemporary landscapes is also, you know, addressing an idea of Englishness and national identity. There's also a very strong autobiographical aspect. So, you know, he didn't see a sky that was that sort of peachy orange colour, you know, unmodulated. They are, you know, abstracted and stylised and adapted as well. But and you'll see that there's an almost total absence of living creatures. There's only one painting that has a human being in it. There are no animals, I think, and there are no cars in the street. So it's, you know, it's based on photography and yet also not. So it starts with those most recent paintings, and then we go to the earliest painting, number 57. This is a painting of the house where he grew up and where his mother still lives. And one of the interesting things... That's all right. Is there an emergency? Should I carry on? Okay. it's one of the interesting things about this, I was just saying, is that it's a very kind of abstracted image, and it reminds me quite a lot of sort of Hockney's paintings of LA. The contrast between suburban Coventry and LA is obvious. But these sort of bands of flat colour, which are then sort of interrupted with architecture. But one of the, and I think that's a deliberate, sort of artistic thing. But and it's very typical also that he will say that many of his paintings, the majority of his paintings, have this very flat, sort of horizontal structure. There isn't. Sometimes he has a very dramatic perspective, but often there's almost very little depth and a lot of straight lines. But the other key thing about this is that he's fascinated by the front doors because it's one of the phenomena that some of you will remember in the sort of 80s and 90s, that once after Margaret Thatcher allowed or encouraged the selling of council houses, you saw these estates which used to have standardised front doors all gradually changing as as the inhabitants asserted their sort of identity and independence through painting the front door as the one that could be registered at. This is a painting of one of the 4 pubs in the estate, the Black Prince. There's a series of paintings called Scenes from the Passion, and Shaw was brought up a Roman Catholic, a fairly sort of committed Roman Catholic family, and so the Passion of Christ, that is the last event of Christ's life, represented sort of traditionally in art through the Stations of the Cross, the 14 moments in his journey from, I think, when he's sort of seen in front of Pilate to the final crucifixion. There are far more than 14 scenes from the Passion in George's thing, so it's a much more generalised idea than that. But I like this. This, I think, is based on a photograph taken on Christmas Eve, and I also like the thought that on Christmas Eve he's looking at this inn. And so this sort of sense of, in the sort of grey, very wet grey environment of the estate, you see this sort of welcoming glow of the lights. Well, that's what I thought. And he was saying the other day he's never been in there because it's the most miserable place. And this is another scenes from the Passion, and this is one of several paintings of sort of run-down garages on the edges of the estate. And I think, he obviously sort of captures the melancholy of the whole situation by the way these places, obviously very systematically built to house the cars of the inhabitants, have been allowed to sort of collapse and fall into dereliction. And I imagine behind that is, design into that estate in the 1950s would have been a sense that you keep the cars there because then you have a very lovely, clean walking environment. It's very typical of a lot of those post-war estates that they were designed around one idea of living, which kept the cars out of sight because they wanted to park in front of the front door because they don't have to do the walk. And the Fall is actually one of the 14 Stations of the Cross, so there is a direct reference there. But look at the beautiful way he paints that reflection. Sort of sad. He's unlucky with the weather, George. This is another view of the Black Prince pub, and you can see, I think, how he uses kind of perspective and that emptying of the place, the removal of all the cars and presumably lampposts and bins and stuff, to create a sort of sense of drama and and a sort of adding significance to the place, sort of giving it, using artistic techniques to give a sort of importance to the subject. So this is one of a pair. There are a number of instances where he's painted the same subject twice. This is the view from the window that was his childhood bedroom. And actually, one of the things I should have said is that, of course, I think of Shaw as kind of painting this environment in the same way that Constable painted Suffolk. This is the place where he grew up. This is the place he knows best. And and the repetition and the constant coming back to the same thing is very much a sort of conscious tactic in his artistic project, if you like. But like all great landscape painters, there is a much bigger subject matter at play. As I said, his concern with the sort of contemporary politics and how that plays out in real lives and real places. But there's also an autobiographical level too. This is the place where he grew up, but he now revisits as an adult, both part of that place and also sort of absent from it. Someone told me yesterday that they'd seen him interviewed, a filmed interview with him, he was saying how his dad was always amused that they had a painting of their house that George had done, which was now worth more than the house. Yeah, it's a really interesting kind of shift of class and status. So, him revisiting this place and painting it, now the place is now well known because George Shaw painted it. It creates a really sort of interesting dynamic. So autobiographical as well. This is called another scene from the Passion, the blossomest blossom, and I think there is the sort of shadow of death is a theme that runs through a lot of Shaw's work. Maybe you would expect that from someone fascinated by his Catholic upbringing. He's also fascinated with Francis Bacon, for whom death is a sort of major theme. And the title refers to a famous TV interview with the playwright Dennis Potter, screenwriter Dennis Potter, who you might remember when he was dying of cancer gave an interview to Melvyn Bragg on TV. And he talks about how that knowledge of his imminent death made everything sort of both very ordinary and also very intense. And he talked about looking out of his window and seeing the tree that he'd seen in blossom every spring. That suddenly, for the first time, it was the blossomest blossom ever. That intensity that you get knowing that you won't see it again, I guess. And you can see sort of slight presentiment. While you have this wonderful, joyous celebration of spring, the shadow cast by the tree, and then the beginning of the fall of the petals of the blossom sort of intimate its sort of demise. And then 3 years later, you see the same subject. And you see the same subject? At night, in the winter or the autumn, and the leaves have gone, and the tree has lost that glorious new beginning and seems as if to be dead. Trees recur again and again, and certainly the crucifixion is in his mind, and you see them often. These are a couple of small paintings. As I said, he's fascinated by the woods that the estate integrates with. And I think the titles of these, particularly The Path Behind the Shops, sort of plays on the irony of this sort of bucolic woodland, a sort of typical view for a landscape painter, and its sort of juxtaposition with this sort of modern housing estate. So you see here the part of each corner, a glimpse of the block of flats that's sort of just on the edge of the wood. And when you see it in the flesh, you'll see there are details here, like the path through the wood is a classic kind of landscape subject, but what's not typical is the sort of very municipal concrete fence posts that are now sort of slightly falling over and the wire's gone, I think. But then the mundanity of the path behind the shops, it looks like a lovely woodland with a cottage in the trees, but actually it's just behind Costcutter or whatever. So he's quite a big pub man, George. I've introduced him to the Star, which I think is the high point for him, the Bath experience. So there were 4 pubs designed into the Tile Hill estate, and that reflects the way the architects of the estate, envisaged not just housing but a whole kind of social life and a community life. And George has over time painted all 4 of them. One is the hawthorn tree. If you notice that it looks like this is a checklist. This is how you spell hawthorn, and that's the type of the painting. In the caption next to it, it's got an E on the end. No, let's not start debating on that. In the caption, it's spelled without an E because that is how the pub had it on their signage. So it's not a mistake. I had to check it. So this is, again, you see how he takes this sort of mundane kind of Art Deco style pub, and by elevating the viewpoint, makes it look rather kind of majestic and fine. And we'll see later that this is a subject he comes back to. So then, in 2004, when he started a series of paintings called Ash Wednesday, as I say, he's a Roman Catholic, and as a child, he would go to the Ash Wednesday service the first day of Lent. And remembers, the priest smearing charcoal or ash on his forehead and saying, from dust you came and from dust you will return, to the dust you will return. As a small child, it's quite a traumatic message to receive. And he walked through the estate on an Ash Wednesday and photographing it all day. And he set out to make a painting for every half hour from 6 a.m. onwards. He got to 9 a.m. and gave up. But I think 9 a.m. is the time of that sort of morning mass, so I don't know whether that's true. But this is 8 a.m. where the sun's just coming up, and you can see it sort of. Turn the lights on. It's a very simple, bare tree trunk casting a shadow on the gable end of a house. But I think very consciously it's referencing the idea of the crucifixion, and maybe that's why we did that. Difficult choice, isn't it? Do you want to see it flickering or not see it at all? Anyway, there's also an art historical reference there. This is Holman Hunt's The Shadow of Death, famous pre-Raphaelite painting where the young Jesus working in his father's carpentry shop stretches from his morning's labour and then unwittingly casts the shadow of his crucifixion on the wall. So that presentiment of death is there. Then 8:30, half an hour later, this wonderful painting, which is slightly different in the flesh to in the photographs. This great, fantastic, dramatic sort of casting of the sunrise through the fence. This beautiful pattern, very abstract, as I say, and clearly a completely sort of unrealistic view. You're not going to see, hope you're never going to see a sky that colour. The view actually is of his primary school in the estate, and so hence the no parking zigzags in the foreground. The form in the middle, which I think probably deliberately looks like the one of Constable Suffolk churches, is, he's told me the other day, the kind of chimney out of the boiler room of the school. So something very mundane becoming, sort of referencing something very grand and arty. And again, this single bare tree conjures up that sense of crucifixion, and of course the shadows have reinforced that idea. Now, running through underneath George's painting is his amazing skill as a draftsman. He's the most beautiful draftsman. He's made hundreds and hundreds of beautiful drawings, and a couple of instances he's selected and assembled drawings into kind of installations. So this is a single work that he calls Spare Time. And they're drawings which collectively sort of try and capture a sense of his kind of cultural purview, if you like, as he was growing up as a teenager in Coventry. Now this is the work, I think you might have been told already that there's some material in the exhibition which some people will find challenging, and this is it, because amongst the things in his mind was inevitably for a teenage boy, pornography. So what you see here is a range of sort of different references. So certain kind of heroes of his, poets like Wilfred Owen and Philip Larkin, who were born in Coventry, musicians, Ian Curtis from Joy Division, sort of classic romantic sort of early death figure, artist Francis Bacon, a still from Ken Loach's Kes film, a whole series of pictures of different Frankensteins from different movies, some things from the news of the time. I think there's a drawing here of a bicycle in the road, which is a press photograph. I think it was about a missing child, and there are 2 or 3 pictures of missing children or murdered children from the news at the time. And this, I think, is a photo fit of the Yorkshire Ripper. Other things which are sort of out of time, but I guess that he was aware of. This is drawings of Ronnie Corbett, Ronnie Barker, and John Cleese from a famous sketch about class, typically. And then, there's a number of drawings of pornographic images, and then these drawings of woodland sort of include sort of not easily read, but pages sort of that's seen in the woods from pornographic magazines. And this is sort of, he talks about how as a teenager they sort of represented this sort of mysterious world of adult sexuality that he had no access to and sort of only a partial understanding of. So that's the reason they're there. And then a couple of sort of direct autobiographical references. A drawing here of sort of tins of paint and brushes. I thought it was a drawing of Francis Bacon's studio. Interestingly, it's a drawing of George's own studio. They're all based on photographs, where he sort of admits he consciously made his studio like Francis Bacon's studio, so famously messy, it's covered all over the floor. And then there's a nice little drawing of a bookshelf here, which is sort of got all the sort of books that you might expect someone with his concerns to have. There's particularly sort of those kind of 1950s social realist books like Saturday Night, Sunday Morning, and Room at the Top, things like that, became those sort of great kitchen sink movies. And then punctuating that group of these sort of one or two, three Christian images as well. So capturing, different aspects of his identity, and then there are sort of, as well as Larkin, there are other Coventry references. This is Lady Godiva, and this is Peeping Tom from that story. There's a whole series of works he made where he sort of, even more directly than usual, sort of seems to kind of reference abstract painting, but obviously is painting, a very real subject. There's a whole series of kind of shop fronts where the sort of very typical kind of 60s, 50s, 60s rectilinear architecture, makes it look like a kind of 60s abstract painting. But playing, his obsession is the sort of dereliction of those places. This is a particularly kind of powerful one. It's called the back that used to be the front, because this is the public library, which was a key element in the Tile Hill estate when it was designed and built, and which George used frequently as a child. And the title refers to the fact that the beginning of the end of the library is when they moved the entrance round to the other side, so it no longer had a kind of logical relationship to the sort of topography of the place, and then it was closed and boarded up. I think I learned from someone yesterday that the graffiti on this, he actually sort of borrowed from elsewhere and sort of put it in to kind of articulate it more. And interesting, when I visited his studio last summer, he was working on a whole series of paintings which was shown in Chicago, I think, using this distinctive motif from the graffiti artist. So this is a large painting called The End of Time, and this is one from a whole series of paintings called The End of. It's called The End of Time because this is the site of one of the 4 pubs in the estate that has been now completely kind of razed to the ground. And you can see how, again, he uses this sort of very strong horizontal structure to make it feel abstract. And in a sense, I think maybe reinforce that sort of sense of desolate demise. This sort of, it's a very kind of stark painting from the Arts Council collection. But a very kind of clear, statement about, this is the site of something that was put there because of the recognition of the importance of kind of sociability and community interaction, and now sort of gone. We've shown 2 of a series of 4 drawings. These are enormous. They're kind of 6 foot wide drawings. Most beautiful things in charcoal of the woods. Around the estate, and they were made a couple of years after George's father had died, and he talks about walking in the woods as he used to with his father, to whom he was very close, and on this occasion intensely feeling his absence because it was a place so strongly associated, and suddenly noticing that the woods, just as they're full of life and growth, they're also always full of kind of death and decay, and suddenly that aspect became very sort of prominent in his view of the woods. So these 2 drawings focus on the fallen trunks, the broken trunks. So the sort of nature as a sort of site of dereliction as well as growth and renewal. All of George's work is, he's incredibly well read. He's a massive sort of fan of James Joyce, for example, and very sort of steeped in art history. And there are lots of sort of echoes in his work of literary references and art historical references, and particularly in relation to this, I hope I've got the slide now, is Paul Nash's paintings of the Western Front in the First World War. This is the famous We're Making New World that Nash made just after the end of the war. You don't quite know whether the sun's rising or setting over these sort of the trees shattered by the shells, the landscape completely hideously distorted by violence, all of, a metaphor for the loss of human life. And then in 2010, he revisited a number of the places that he painted previously. This, you remember, the Hawthorne pub is now left to rot. So this sort of very by the fence in our car park. So that's not a great reference. This sort of fence put up to keep people out while the roof has collapsed and the windows are smashed and so on. So yet again, another of these communal spaces which has been sort of deliberately kind of closed down and left to fall into disrepair. And this landscape with dog shit bin from Damien Hirst's collection is almost unrecognisable apart from the puddle. It's the site of those garages at the beginning of the exhibition. And I mean, it's interesting because in a way it's sort of become rather bucolic in contrast to that sort of the broken down garages. But when you see it much more powerfully in the flesh, it's the red of the bin where you put your dog poo. And I like the sort of idea that George is sort of interested in the irony of a place which, in a way, has gone back to nature. But while we've allowed those kind of communal facilities to rot and fall apart and be closed down, we are more insistent on a sort of certain kind of cleanliness that you can't walk in the woods without picking up your dog poo, which I think wasn't an issue in the 1950s when we were more concentrating on social cohesion and building a better world generally. As I say, he's really interested in a kind of dialogue with abstraction, and I think while he's kind of, he's very kind of open-minded and respectful of other, artists, I think rather like David Hockney, he sort of, sees a sort of slight, vacuousness in abstract art, in comparison to art which engages directly with, human life and human experience. So this is called Detail of Untitled, which is a sort of play on kind of art world, conventions in terms of titles. I think he was interested in the way this whole paint has been splashed over some other graffiti. So it's a sort of, in a way, there's a kind of successive artistic statements going on. He said he wanted to paint a splash like Hockney did, and Bacon did a famous splash as well. It's an artistic challenge to find, a way of freezing in a single image something which is, necessarily sort of temporary. The comparison's not quite direct. Image, which of course, the splash of red brings up a sort of, slight kind of suggestion of violence, the sort of blood-like gesture. The other painting another painting he became really interested in, this Constable, the cenotaph for Joshua Reynolds, which is a sort of great, sort of wooded landscape scene, which is then sort of, kind of interrupted by this unexpected insertion of this sort of monument to Reynolds and this sort of frightened stag standing in front of it. So I think in his mind behind these last two paintings in the show, one of this sort of tree into which graffiti has been gouged, but then this other one, which is only one of two paintings he's made at all with figures in, and this is a self-portrait. He was conscious walking around the National Gallery that the number of self-portraits there, and he thought he ought to do one in every sense. So he painted himself urinating against a tree, and that sort of sense of desecration and kind of intrusion into an idealistic place, was sort of echoing that sort of that intrusion of death in the cenotaph to Reynolds in Constable's landscape. So, which is a tradition. It brings to mind also Poussin's kind of Et in Arcadia Ego, that you can have this idyllic scene where the sort of the death intrudes, even in Arcadia. And then finally, just coming back to the importance of the woodlands, you can see here how very direct that sort of Nash desolation reference is in that sort of first painting we saw, the sun rise over the care home. Sort of ironic use of the sunrise, and sort of ambiguous as well, because this care home is gone, but actually what's left is a rather beautiful parkland, or at least beautiful when seen in that light. So art historical echoes, a sense of irony, but also a sense of something coming to an end, and a sense of loss are absolutely key to what George has done. And I think that's it. Should we do questions now, or should we do them at the end? Let's do that. I'm going to hand over to Louise. Who's going to talk about why museums matter. She's going to just carry on. You don't have to do it.
Let's see. Hello, everybody. Before I talk about the exhibition, I'm at the risk of repeating myself. I just thought I'd give a little bit of background to the exhibition because really this exhibition is a celebration of work that we've been developing for the last 3 years, actually more than 3 years, but for the last 3 years we've had funding from the big lottery to work on a large programme called Pathways to Wellbeing, which I know a lot of people here have been involved in. And underneath that programme is a basic awareness that there's a growing evidence base to show that museums, as well as being places of learning, as well as caring and looking after beautiful objects and pieces of art that we want to display and enable people to see, museums can also be spaces of well-being, and they can have real health benefits. And I went up to London, to UCL, and I saw a really interesting researcher who's looking at huge data sets. You know, the big data collection that sort of started happening, I think, probably about 40 years ago, where they sort of followed people from when they were, I don't know, 2, and they've carried on following them. So they've got really, tens of thousands of people. And she's analysing, amongst other things, people's engagement with museums, with theatre, with things like that, to see if there are correlations. And what it's showing is that actually, if you engage with museums throughout your life, that there are health benefits, physical health benefits and mental health benefits as well. So there's really strong evidence to show this, which, we know because as volunteers, you know that being in a museum, it can really have, calming effect on you. They're beautiful spaces, they're spaces to reflect, all those things that I know you know, but I think people are realising that there is a place for museums in terms of health as well. And so our work is grounded in that sort of understanding. And I've put this slide up just to show that there was a all-parliamentary party group who were looking at sort of creative health and the arts and well-being, and they published this report, which is really interesting. But what GPs are saying is that 1 in 5 of the people that go to GPs, the things that they need or they can't prescribe because they need a social solution, and that's where museums come in. And you might have heard of the term social prescribing, the idea that you might go to your GP and you might say, oh, I don't know, I'm not feeling great at the moment, I'm feeling lonely, or a number of things. And the GP, instead of prescribing antidepressants or whatever, might say, why don't you go to a museum and do an art course, and that is starting to happen. This is just about our 3-year project, Pathways to Wellbeing, and so we were really delighted to be funded by the big lottery to do this project. I just thought I'd put this slide up because it just shows over the last 3 years, I've got hundreds of photos, but these are just some of the things that have been going on, and I know some people here are in these photos, I think, if you look very carefully. Just at all the creativity in the Gardener's Lodge, and here we've had well-being, creativity and well-being coffee mornings, and lots of activities, people enjoying the museum, enjoying the collection, being inspired, and then making their own art. But whilst doing that, meeting other people, getting to know the staff, getting to know you as well, and feeling like they're welcome here, that this is a place for them, which maybe sometimes they might not have. So that's what we and you and all of us have been doing. So why museums matter. I'm going to talk. There are sort of 2 parts of this exhibition. One of them is in the Worth Gallery, and that is a collection of pieces of work made by people that have come to the groups over the last 3 years. So we put out a kind of call, and we said anybody that's come to the groups or been working through the Gardeners Lodge, there were 4 different groups, you're invited to create a piece of work. We want you to choose something that you love or that's inspired you in the collection, and we want you to make a piece of work that responds to it, a piece of artwork. And people went off. Most of them immediately knew which piece of art or object they wanted to choose because they'd been looking at it for a long time. And then they, through the groups and also outside the groups at home, made those pieces of art. They submitted them. We then looked at them and we chose a number. We couldn't choose everything, although we did try to choose quite a lot. And those have then been framed. And what the idea behind it was that we wanted to display them as we would any other piece in the museum and give those pieces the recognition and celebrate those pieces of work. As you can imagine, this is a huge thing for the people that have their work displayed. They might have never shown their work before. They might not think that their work would warrant that. So I think tonight, when they see it, because some of them haven't seen it before, they're going to be, wowed. So I was just going to show you some of the pieces, but obviously you can go up and have a look yourself. So first of all, Anna spent 3 months teaching herself beading, and inspired obviously by our wonderful beadwork basket, and wanted to recreate a different wedding. And this is Meghan Markle and Prince Harry. So she fell in love with the bead basket, and it was very time consuming to make this, and she talks about realising the skill of the young woman that made this and just how long it takes to do this. And one of the things we asked the people who gave in work to go into the exhibition, we asked them to write a short piece, I think it was 200 words, to just take us on a journey with them, explain why they were inspired by the piece and how they developed the work and what it meant to them. Some people have shared what it meant for their well-being as well. So alongside each piece of work is a rather large label, but we just felt we wanted their voices to be heard. So do read those labels. They're really moving, some of them. So also going back to, Chris was talking about the Diana and Action, you'll all know our wonderful Maiolica earthenware, a very large, beautiful dish. So Matthew, was very inspired by this, and he created this very colourful and dramatic abstract. Now, the link between this piece and this piece becomes apparent when you go up to the Worth, because I decided to frame his sketchbook. Have a look at his sketchbook, and unfortunately I couldn't show all of it, but he started from here and he got to there, and unfortunately you probably need a whole gallery to show it, but he goes from initial drawings through abstraction. So I think the sketchbook is beautiful. Now, I have to apologise. Sarah's piece, we were late in choosing which one we wanted to frame. So this is not in the exhibition. This was one of 2. But you'll see there's another piece by her. But they were both inspired by this piece that's in the closet. So I think they just show how much people love the collection and how it can inspire art and creativity. And finally, Jo's piece. She fell in love with the Crouching Venus. Some of you might have heard her talking about it because she did the mental volunteering program. She she wanted to, in some way, respond to it. Now, Jo has never used pastels before, and the last time she did any drawing was when she was sort of at school. And she told me that she'd done a drawing at school, and her teacher had said, I don't know if any of you have had this experience, I used to be an art teacher, when you've done a drawing and the teacher says, now can you paint it? And she painted over her drawing and she destroyed it, and it really upset her. So she didn't really draw, and she did a sketch of the Sazzini, and I encouraged her. I said, well, look, take these pastels, just take them, see what, have a go with them. And about 5 hours after the group on Wednesday, I got a text from her, and she said, I've done this. And she sent me a photo, and it was that. And I couldn't believe it, and I don't think she could either, actually. So she's kind of surprised herself. But her aim through doing these 2 drawings that she's done is to get people to go back down and look at the Sazzini, because she's in the galleries was noticing that people just look at the front of it. The back of it is so beautiful too. So her aim is to inspire people to go back and look at the object, and I think a lot of the work in there is the same. Now, also, that's the Worth Gallery, but you will have all seen these plinths in the museum. They've also gone out, so they've been here, but one went to the Roman Baths, and there's one at Newton Park, the Bath University campus, and we've received over 1,500 responses from people who have willingly shared why museums matter to them. And the responses we've had, I wasn't expecting people to be so thoughtful and care so much about sharing their thoughts about museums. And I have them all typed up. If you ever want to feel good about volunteering in a museum or working in a museum, read them. They make you think, yes, this is brilliant, because people really care. I've just put some of them, but there are so many inspirational things that people have shared with us. So what we did with this huge sort of database of ideas and feelings and thoughts was to look for themes. And one of the themes that came out of all this sharing, there was one word, and it was connection, because people talked about connecting with history, connecting with the past. They talked about connecting with craftspeople or the artists that had made the objects. They talked about connecting with their own creativity, sort of being inspired suddenly to go away and make something. And they talked about connecting with other people. A lot of people come to museums or look at art, it might be with another person, and you just see people starting to talk to each other and connect with each other. So that was a word that sort of kept coming up in different ways. And talking about communities, museums being communities as well. So we worked with the graduates from Bath University, and it was a really hard brief. We said, okay, we've got all these comments, here you go, read them. Can you make a wonderful piece of art, installation, to go on our ballroom table that sort of brings all that together? Off you go. That's a hard brief for him. And he went away, and what he came up with, this is his presentation when he first came back to us. He said, well, what I notice is this idea of connection. That's what's coming through. And it made me think of a molecular structure and how everything connects, the different elements within a molecule can connect. And he showed us this image. And he started to say, well, one of the things that people are talking about are the objects or the materials of the objects. And he said, I was starting to think about your collection. You see, he's sort of looking at the colours and the qualities of the materials, and starting to think that maybe he could use these for the balls in that molecular structure. So he went away And he came back and showed us this, which was a sort of, I think it's a CAD drawing for something that might go on the ballroom table. And the idea of museum as molecule is the idea of all those elements I was talking about, so the objects, the materials that the artists use. We've got some unusual materials that maybe aren't used now in our collection, but people are interested in. You can't touch them, but you can see them. So those, but also the other connections we're talking about, and history, so thinking about the past, craftspeople, but also I said, hang on, you've forgotten one element in this. It's people. It's the connections people make to the collection and to each other. So he inserted into these balls mirrored balls as well, so that you could actually see yourself in the museum, part of that molecule. So I haven't got a picture of the final piece, it's upstairs, so I thought, you know, you can go and see where those ideas ended up, because it's up there now. But just to say that also in the ballroom is the Hockley wall has been transformed into a comments wall. It is incredibly bright. I didn't realise quite how dramatic it would be, but those are the comments of some, not all of the people that have contributed, and most of them we've kept the coloured side because it's beautiful, but some of them we've turned over so you can read people's comments, and the idea is that people can still comment, and so we've put a pedestal in there so that people can carry on posting their comments, so we carry on that dialogue with people. And the last thing I just wanted to say was that working with the groups, I'm really aware that the way we talk about pathways and the people that have exhibited work in the Worth Gallery is really important. I've had lots of conversations with people, and obviously the groups do support people with a range of mental health issues, or they're living with mental health issues. For some people, something's happened in their life and it's thrown them off course, and I think all of us at some stage in our lives have had to cope with, you know, really difficult things. But I think it's really important to me that we don't label people, because I feel very uncomfortable doing that, and I know that people in the group wouldn't want to be labelled in that way at all. We've spent 3 years talking about art, and they are artists. They're not professional artists, but the work they're displaying is art, and it's amazing. So we talk about well-being, we talk about promoting well-being, and I'd really appreciate it if we use that language, because I think it's much more positive. So if you are talking to people or explaining, you know, the project or the work, the word you could use is well-being, is promoting well-being, rather than focusing on this is made by people with mental health issues, which I think signifies something else, and it's not. It's definitely not what you know, what those people would identify as, if that makes sense. Okay, thank you.